Well, welcome to another episode of the Miles Driven podcast. And if this is your first time watching, welcome. I know, so we're launching a whole separate channel for the Miles Driven podcast, and this is the very first one. But we are, for those of you listening, as you'll know, we're 100, and this will be the 104th episode and the fourth episode of the newest series. After a long hiatus, the podcast is back with just me. So, we're going to talk about in this episode, if you and I tomorrow decided that's it, we really love cars and we're going to launch a car business, how do we do this? And it's going to become a bit of a series episode, so I can't cover it all in one episode, because there are, just to get across one thing, the car business has so many aspects to it. It just is not anymore a case of turn up, build a car with your mates, show up to some car show, take some orders on the books and build them. And I think that sort of romantic view of car building probably hasn't existed for a very, very long period of time, but there certainly was a period, maybe around the 1950s, maybe earlier than that, that was a reality, and a lot of that was done by coach building. Before we get into it, so this first episode is going to be, let's get a car company off the ground. What do we need? In the second episode, we're going to talk more about the sales side, so the dealership side, how you actually get a dealership network started and what expectations they have of you. And in the third episode, we'll talk about sort of trying to keep a car company going, because the one standout thing for the car business over and above most, I don't want to say all business, because you could do this on any business really, but there are certainly more entrants that have failed than have succeeded. And I would say in the car business, you've got well over 1,000 car companies that have ever existed that are no more. And so starting is one thing, existing is another thing, and that's where this becomes so interesting. And I think once we get past this first episode, for those of you that don't know too much about the car business but are a car enthusiast, you'll realize how fascinating it can get on the other side of the coin. First off though, I'm going to do the news, because I don't want to save it until the very, very end, just in case a few of you that are eager to hear the latest in the car world. There's only 3 bits of news that I thought were worth bringing up here, and we do have a few questions, but I will save those questions until the end. So first off, the brand new BMW i3 has been unveiled, and it is here. It is not quite yet open for order books, but I think it's going to be very, very shortly. Now, what I just have to separate here, it's not a replacement for the previous BMW i3. So if you are someone that had the sort of, at the time when they launched it, it was quite a futuristic hatchback, the original i3. This is not that. This is the 3 Series, but electric. So it's going to be under the newer Klaus design language. It's going to be an i3. It's going to remove the i4, at least for now. Whether BMW will do an i4 is still up for questions, because the 4 Series will likely continue for another year, as the sort of coupe and convertible of the 3 Series always do. If you're in China, this news won't really mean much to you, because you've actually had a car that is the i3 for a good number of years now, about 5-6 years. So this is merely a replacement of the current i3. So yeah, we've got the new i3 that's been shown to the world. Ineos, I like talking about Ineos. I barely ever get to sort of talk about them, but they're really fitting for this particular podcast, because of course Ineos are historically a petrochemical company and all the stuff there, but they are now a car company. They make the Grenadier and the Quartermaster and the Fusilier with their new one. I think the Fusilier, I think it's going to be the electric one. But just what you usually hear when a car is launched, and you'll hear me if you've watched any buyer's guide on the main channel, which is the Miles Driven, just in case you're sort of completely new to the Miles Driven sort of little world that we've got here. I do a lot of buyer's guides on there, and what you'll usually hear me say when I say, oh, production numbers were X, Y, Z, or the best year to buy is this or that, you get a very good number launched in the first year, good number launched in the second year, and then after that, sales generally tail off. You get a facelift, numbers jump up again, and then cars sort of get their long sort of wait to be replaced. in which case you get a few special editions, you get sort of a few optional extras added as packages, and usually in the last year of production, everything is thrown at it for the base money, just to shift a few more chassis. So that is not the case with Ineos. They have just recorded, so sales hit a new record in Q1 of 2026, and at this point it was 2022 that the Grenadier was first launched for the 2023 model year. So I had a quick look at sales years, by the way, before this, and 2023 going into 24, there was an increase from very early sales in 22, don't really count because it wasn't a full year. But I just think that's fantastic for a new entrant into the car market, and they have managed to find exactly what you're going to hear me talk about when it comes to the car business, in that they identified a niche within the market. It's a bit, actually, I know probably none of you, if any of you, are content creators or work in media or anything like that, but one thing becomes painfully pointed out to you when you work in this sphere, is that niches are really, I wouldn't say the future, but they are at least the current. So as much as I love lots of different cars, and I try and make content for as many people as possible with as much car content as possible, and it'd probably be much better off if I just specialized in BMWs or just, Porsches and Land Rovers or something, or, became a classic Volvo restorer. That, generally speaking, is where you'll get the most views, because the content systems that exist in the world, so, your Instagrams, your Facebooks, your YouTubes, TikToks and all that sort of stuff, they really try and isolate you as a point of, let's find your group and let you thrive in that silo. And that's great, but if you're a bit more generalized, as we try to be, especially in car media, it can mean that you do really well with some content for particular cars, and then no one watches your other stuff, and it makes it actually quite a difficult business to be in. But when it comes to cars, that is triple so, because if you, let's say you're Ferrari, and you release an SUV or an FUV, as they are calling their car, the Parasangue, which is essentially their version of an SUV. People go up in arms about it. Why are you not making sports cars? So, Anyway, moving on from that bit of news, just to the last bit, which is Aston Martin have got their first win with the Vantage GT Racer at the GT World Challenge at the European segment at the Paul Ricard's circuit. So big congratulations for them. I think it's really important to try and celebrate. Obviously, look, this is a channel that celebrates all car stuff, but I do like the British car brands, of course I do. And Aston Martin have had a tough run of it in the racing world. I'm sure many of you watch Formula One and know they've really struggled this season. So to hear they've had success in at least some elements of their racing sphere is very, very good. So I'll save questions until the end. That's the little bit of news. Let's move on to the main topic today, and that is you and I have decided let's launch a car brand together, shall we? Yeah, let's just, we're seeing there's Chinese car companies doing it, and there's a few, like the Grenadiers of the world and Koenigsegg. They've managed to make a success of it. So why don't we give it a go? And we're going to have to go through quite a lot of development and challenges that we may not have foreseen. So let's get the very first bit out of the way. Just like launching any new business, you need to do all the businessy type things, get your accounts in order, decide what your name's going to be and your logo and all that sort of fun stuff, the way you get to get a pen and pencil out and just imagine what the future of your brand is. So all the fun bit there is done. And now we have to decide what segment of the market, going back to earlier, are we going to be in? So are you going to try and be a Mercedes-Benz competitor in the luxury end of the market? Are you going to try and compete against Porsche or Lamborghini and be a performance car manufacturer? Are you going to try and be the, I would call them niche, but it's probably unfair for Ferrari, but the hyper car world, so Koenigseggs, Paganis, this type of end of the market Bugatti, where you're just selling a very small number of cars to a very small number of people at extremely high amounts of money, Or do you want to be a dependable and yet sometimes fun-loving car maker? Now, you can think of that as your Fords, your Toyotas, your Volkswagens, the stuff that people buy. You and I have decided we're going to take on the toughest challenge possible here. No, we're not. We're not. The toughest challenge would be that dependable market, just as an FYI. So Volkswagen is a huge group. It has Seat, it has Audi, it has Skoda. Obviously, Volkswagen themselves, Porsche is within their group, so is Lamborghini, so is Kawasaki, so is Scania trucks, so is there's so many I'm actually going to forget of it. Cupra would be another one, obviously Seat and Cupra are now two different brands, and work could carry on. But the point there is to survive, these brands have basically all had to go under one roof. In Volkswagen, you've got Volkswagen. Toyota are a unique story, but they still do have quite a few brands underneath them, including Suzuki and obviously Lexus, as many as you all know. But they also own they own controlling stakes in a lot of engineering firms, a lot of parts suppliers. And that's why when the world shut down, this is important for us to know if we're going to launch a car company. When the world shut down and the pandemics were here, Toyota kept building cars. And when all the other manufacturers were saying, well, prices are going to have to increase dramatically, Toyota said, yeah, they'll have to increase a bit, but not too much. And obviously, with time, they have increased prices. But that was because they had extreme control over their supply, because they owned a lot of companies that supply them. Your other sort of big player here is Ford. Don't really need to say too much about that. Ford is Ford. Because they have both the power of the American market, they sell the number one truck in the world from the point of view of sales in America. And as we're going to get onto here, if you're selling in the markets of the world, there are three markets that you have to sell in. One is the USA, one is Europe, and one is China. And if you can just sell in one of them really, really well, you can be okay not selling in the others. If you can't sell in any of those three, yeah, you're not going to be around for very long. Now, we looked at that and we said, no, that looks way too difficult. And let's face it, your new car entrants from China like BYD, they've gone for that market, trying to supply people with affordable cars that they will sort of put enthusiast versions out of. But ultimately, they're trying to supply the largest segment of the market. So we've decided, I'll put it off on my notes here, that we're going to make two cars and we're going to sit somewhere between the luxury and the performance market, but we're going to try and be affordable. And what affordable means to one person will not mean what it means to someone else. So I'll highlight it here that affordable in this context, and bear in mind, I'm not saying the dependable car, I'm saying luxury performance, will be to try and sell a car between £35,000 and £90,000. If you're in the US, that's between $50,000 and $130,000 for the Aussies. I know I get quite a good audience actually. I don't know how the podcast YouTube channel will do, but I know what the podcast generally gets listener wise, and I know the UK, USA, and Canada, and the Aussies and New Zealanders, along with a few South Africans, are the listenership. And actually, there's more Americans than I thought there would be, and the same with the Aussies. So I try and give equivalents wherever I can. But that may not sound affordable to you, but for the car world, that is the sort of affordable, chunky bit of the market. You have to remember at this point in time, right now as I'm recording this, a Golf GTI is £40,000, and that's before you start putting bits on it, and you can quite easily get one to £50,000. So, you see where we're at in the world. So it's going to be a challenge, but we've decided because we're launching, we're going to have an SUV, because everyone loves SUVs, everyone buys SUVs, and even people that say they hate SUVs still have SUVs. And we're going to try and sell something like a sports car. Now, the reason I say something like a sports car is because sports cars have, it's rather tragic for me to say, sports cars have failed. Okay, I say that with a heavy heart, but it's the reality. There is I think there's one affordable sports car left, which is the Mazda MX-5. I used to sell, because I worked at Mazda for a number of years, I used to sell MX-5s brand new. And I remember when I sold them, there were competitors. But ultimately, people that could buy a sports car came to buy MX-5s. But honestly, I sold to a market of people that were not going to be replacing their MX-5 with another one. A lot of them were retiring, and they wanted something that wasn't particularly powerful, but they could actually drive and enjoy. And they, maybe they didn't have the money to go up to a Porsche, or they didn't want a Porsche, but that would have been the next sort of step up the rung. There were some Japanese entrants, and they have all pretty much disappeared from the world market. There are some exceptions. I do want to note that, but ultimately, selling sports cars is a tough market. And most sports car buyers today of yesteryear, let's just say people who had a sports car when they were 30, who are now, let's say 65. Let's say, so you had a sports car, you were 30, you had children, you had to buy an estate car or an SUV. And now your children have moved out and they finally left home, and you can say, oh, you only need 2 seats for you and your partner. Why don't you go and get a sports car again? Most likely you're buying some type of SUV, maybe a sporty SUV, but probably not another sports car. And I hope there's a few of you watching that will argue with that and say, no, I'd buy an MX-5 or something similar. The Porsche 718 is the other end of the exception, but it steps sort of up in price. And as many of you know, that car is not currently being built in most countries. I think the US are having their last orders if they're selling them new at all. So we've decided those are the 2 markets. We're going to try and sell something sporty-ish. It may be a hatchback, but we're going to try and sell a sports car. And then we're going to try and sell an SUV. Okay, great. So the first decision we need to make underneath these cars are what chassis are we going to have? Now, the majority of chassis that are built today are monocoque chassis. So the chassis, the body is the chassis. Okay, monocoque actually might be incorrect in this term. I might be thinking of a sports car, but essentially it's not body on frame. You have to imagine the whole car is just a big shell, and there is no separation. So there's no underneath to the body. There's no frame that it's built upon. If you go back to cars when they originated, actually, cars used to be built on top of a chassis. So you would have someone build the underside and then someone would build the body. That's not the majority of cars. Exceptions being that Ineos Grenadier that I mentioned earlier, the old Land Rover Defender, the most pickup trucks are probably the exception that you'd find most commonly. But we're not interested in building a pickup truck. We want an SUV, so we're going to have to build an entire shell. Okay, and what all of these shells that are built have is a platform underneath them. Okay, so if you think of a BMW 2 Series and a BMW 3 Series, or a Volkswagen Golf and a Volkswagen T-Roc, and a Volkswagen T-Roc, underneath them they share a logic, okay, or an engineering platform, i.e. you can put both sort of from 1 inch up of the body, you can build different bodies, but on the same underside. So a little bit like that ladder idea, but not quite. And that really sets where the bulkhead can be. It sets the size of the passenger compartment, where the rear seats can be, where the front seats will anchor, how much boot space you will have, where the wheels will sit in the chassis. Some chassis are built to have flexibility. So if you think of BMW, they build chassis that are the CLAR platforms, the newer ones, CLAR, and they are built to have some flexibility within them. Volvo's SPA platform is also built to have flexibility so that you can build slightly smaller cars, slightly longer cars. You can actually extend the wheelbase without having some floppy car that doesn't work because, the back and the front are too thinly connected. And you can put an SUV on top of it. So we're having to make that decision, and we've decided, well, we're not going to build a ladder frame. It's too old school for us. We're going to go with the new school. Okay. The big issue that we have immediately at this point is we need a lot of money, a lot of money, because building a brand new platform underneath a car is a colossal challenge, and it also will decide what engine we can use, or what engines we can fit. Now, if you go with the ladder chassis, you can, assuming you get the right size ladder chassis, you can put a little bit more flexibility within it. Things like the anchor points within inside it, you can work with a little bit more flexibility. It's not perfect, but once you've decided, for example, that a transmission tunnel will run through the middle of your car, you're kind of set where you're going to have certain computers sit, where you're going to have the seat belts anchored, and all those things may be slightly different if you're going to have a ladder chassis underneath, where you have to then design that to be able to hold things like the suspension, and the drivetrain will run through it somehow. But we decided to go for this big challenge, and so the first people we spoke to are a group of engineers who design the drive line, the actual driving machine of a car, and they're very, very, very different people to the people that design a car. So we've had to go off to two different groups very, very early on, who said, well, we want a familiar front to them, so they have to share some looks about them, but we understand we're building two quite different cars. So if you think a Toyota RAV4 and a Toyota Corolla don't really look the same, but they follow a certain design language so that you could pick them out and say, that's probably a Toyota. If you're enjoying the show, then why not share it with a friend? And don't forget to add a follow if you're listening on a podcast player, or to subscribe to the Miles Driven podcast if you're watching this. And now, back to the show. And so, great, we've had discussions with these two people. They've gone off to do their thing. One are doing design, the other are doing the actual machinery, or the machining of how this thing is going to drive. Now, the next big challenge we've called up our government, whoever they may be, and whatever party is currently ruling. And we've had to decide whether the people that we're speaking to actually can give us any real guidance, because maybe they're going to be voted out next week. And if they are, maybe their particular things that are important to them are not so important to them. That, I won't go too far into politics, but anyone who's watched the last sort of 5 years of elections throughout Western Europe and North America will understand that there's been some quite different views, and none of the people involved in making these decisions seem to have any idea whatsoever how the car business functions. They kind of just think you can decree a law or a rule, and that'll be at that. So we've had to decide, are we going to be an EV brand? Are we going to make hybrid cars? And if we do make hybrid cars, are we going to make self-charging hybrids, plug-in hybrids, or are we going to make some hybrid where the engine doesn't power the wheels, instead it just powers the battery, like the new London taxis? Or are we going to build an old school combustion engine? Now, as I said to you earlier, we need to sell our car at least in one of the three dominant markets of the world. Preferably, if you can sell your car in South America, which is a humongous market, but is a bit more price sensitive. Now, Australia is a big bonus to have along with New Zealand, but generally speaking, the way those markets, the same as the Middle East, are looked at, you try and build something that will work in either the US or Europe, and it should work in Australia, New Zealand, and the Middle East region. And that's because, for example, let's say you've got a Ford Mustang with a big 5-litre engine, you'll be able to sell that in the Middle East because fuel price sensitivity just isn't in existence in a similar way to, for a lot of the USA, outside of California, there's less price sensitivity to oil. Now in Australia, there is some price sensitivity to oil prices, but it's not quite as acute as it is in Europe. It is pretty high, but it's not quite as much. And Aussies have to buy vehicles that will actually work across their entire land, unless they never leave the city. So Sometimes you're trying to build a sort of US spec vehicle for Australians, or sometimes you're just trying to use European spec. But ultimately, if it works in one of the other three big markets, it will probably work in South America and in Australia and New Zealand. The difficulty with South America is price sensitivity. What you find with South American vehicles, especially if it's from the big brands, they actually have a lot of specifications stripped out of them to get the price down. The fortunate part for selling there is there are slightly less regulations and hoops to jump through. But as I say, we have to sell in one, if not all three of the big markets. So yes, EV, that's a big thumbs up in all the markets from the regulations point of view. But the market is quite clearly telling us that that is a challenging market for a new car entrant, not just because you're battling with the industrial might of China and you're going to lose if you're just taking them head on the EV battle. Now, in the hybrid battle, it's more interesting. In the combustion engine world, you probably have the most space, but and Grenadier is the Ineos Grenadier and Quartermaster and the vehicles from Ineos are a fantastic example of this. That's probably the best way, especially if you can get an identity behind a combustion engine like the Grenadier, like the Ineos company has, although they're building an electric vehicle, probably will be hybrid, with an engine powering a battery. But this is one of the areas that between the years of, say, 2019 and 2024, it didn't get the investment that it probably should have for the major reason that basically the whole of Europe said, if you're going to build a combustion engine car, you're not going to be able to sell it here after either 2030 or 2035. The calamitous and, from a car enthusiast point, just mad people that were running the UK at the time seemed to think they could bring that even further forward, because they were clearly all masters of engineering and understood the car market impeccably. And they thought you can just put a line in the sand 10 years down the line. And what we have to understand with our new car business is, from the first idea to the point where you sell your first car, doing that in 10 years, from inception of idea to first sale, that's about average pace. If you can do it in 7 years, you're thundering. 5 years, you must be making one car for a very specialist market. 3 years, that's China. And it's you can't compete with that. You know, if you've got 1,000 people designing a door handle and getting it right because there's 1,000 of them having a go at it, and a seemingly unending amount of money to invest in these companies, because there's so much investment through domestic investment in China through their domestic companies. Yeah, I mean, you can work a factory 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, just have staff in and out all day long. Well, we're not trying to battle with that, but we are aware of all of this putting pressure on us, and we haven't even got out the gate at this point. We haven't even got a chassis to put an engine in. And so we've decided the best thing that we can do, we're going to try and sell a hybrid, and we're going to try and sell a mild hybrid combustion engine. For those of you not too familiar with the main difference, is a mild hybrid is essentially a regular combustion engine with some form of hybridization on the alternator and starter motor, so that you never drive the car with that power. You really just give it a little boost, and possibly you can shut the engine off when the car is running for very short periods of time, and take some of the energy that's used for braking and put that into a very small battery pack. And you can also boost acceleration by using a system that is usually parasitic to a drivetrain. I know I'm getting a bit technical. Don't worry, I'll explain it in just a second. But you can essentially use an area that would usually take energy from the drivetrain, be parasitic to it, like sort of an alternator that would usually be taking energy off of your combustion engine and sending it to power the battery. You're using a different method to send energy to it, and then you can do the reverse and send the power into the engine rather than taking away. That's a mild hybrid system. It's very basic from a hybrid point of view. but it works, it's effective, it does add complexity, but we've had a look at the regulations and we've decided that that should be safe to sell at least until 2035. Realistically, the people who are in power are likely to keep knocking this back as they realised that they were being extremely unrealistic in the first place. And ultimately, and this comes straight from my lecturers when I got, so I didn't, for those of you that have listened to the channel for a long time, you probably already know this, I didn't get a journalist degree, I didn't study engineering, I went and did an economics degree. It's like completely left field for being in the car world. And my lecturers were told you over and over, and a few of them, we had a few guest lecturers that were fantastic. They were advisors to some of the largest organisations or governments or unions of governments in the world. And they would have said to you, if a government puts a hard deadline on something they don't understand, you can bet on one thing only, and that's that they will have to continuously move it as the market tells them the answer to their question, because they were not smart enough to understand that in the first place. And ultimately, that just sort of says, lots of people want to reduce pollution and to reduce carbon emissions. Lots of people also need to get to work on Monday morning. And if you don't give them a sustainable and effective answer to that problem, then they'll just keep doing what they're doing. And that's probably why we have, for the first time ever, we have the oldest average fleet age of cars in Western countries. Basically, people aren't buying new cars, they're driving their old, higher polluting cars because they can't afford new ones, because prices have got so wild. And why have prices gone up? Because, again, there's been a lot of interference and regulation that says you have to fit extremely expensive safety equipment into your car if you want to be able to sell it. And so we've jumped our first hurdle here, which is we've decided we're going to sell a plug-in hybrid on our SUV. And for our sporty car, we're going to have a combustion engine. But immediately, we've got big problems. And that's that. While the regulations say we can sell our car with those engines, we have to invest heavily in safety systems that we know our customers are going to turn off. For example, ADAS and all different types of radar systems to read the road ahead. The problem is they're mandated now, 2024 for Europe. In the US, it's slightly behind, but ultimately a lot of customers are now expecting it because so many cars come with it as standard, especially from Europe. So we're forced down an avenue here, and that means we have to call up some third-party manufacturers. We're not going to build a radar system ourselves. Even Tesla have a camera-operated system, and even with all the stuff, I'll just say technological advances they may have made, they've stuck with a fairly basic system that Tesla enthusiasts swear blind is all you need, and the entire industry argues with and say, no, you need radar. But radar is jolly expensive. I mean, you really are increasing the price of a car dramatically by fitting radar systems into it. However, we need them. So we're going to call up a few suppliers. We're not going to design one ourselves. We just haven't got the time or the money. We're trying to sell a car here, not reinvent the wheel. So we realise we also are going to need computers to run the car, we're going to need a battery system, and we're going to need brakes and suspension. And we've spoken to our engineers who are already having the biggest of arguments you've ever seen between the design department and the engineers who are actually designing how the thing is going to move. And so we've walked away from that room and we've gone over to try and secure some suppliers. So we spoke to Bosch. Bosch do a lot of ECUs, they do a lot of electrical systems, so we're happy. And we've managed to get a few different systems off them that they supply to bigger original equipment manufacturers or OEMs, and they're going to give us some radar systems. Fantastic. We're off to a bit of a flyer here. We haven't just got a radar system, we have got an idea of a powertrain. We haven't actually got a powertrain. We're going to speak to Varta. They're going to give us some more electrics for our car. We had a look at designing brakes ourselves. And again, we're breaking a car down here, but these are all the things you have to think about if you're going to start a car company. Are you going to make your own brakes? Probably not. So we've decided, because we're a bit fancy, we're going to call up Brembo, and they're going to make us a set of brakes, because everyone's heard of Brembo and they look very, very good on a car with their badge on them. Enthusiasts have heard of them and they know who they are. So Brembo. And then we've had a look at suspension. Now we've got a bit of a problem here. The engineers that we've got designing our platform and how our car is going to move would like to design parts of the suspension themselves. And then they showed us how much that's going to cost. And we reminded them we're trying to not build six-figure vehicles here. And so we've called up Koenigsegg, who make suspension, and we said, look, better that you guys do it. Because we just haven't got the money. And if you can make us sort of basically some off-the-shelf system, but customize it for us, we're willing to pay you. Fantastic. What we have at the moment is an idea of how we're going to power a car, some radars, all the electrics and gubbins that are going to go into it that we were never going to make. And most car manufacturers don't make themselves. They just partner with other firms to supply into them. And just as a slight aside here, if you've ever wondered about how economies work and thought to yourself, is it a bit like an octopus? It very much is like an octopus, okay? If you've got the big body in the middle, it's probably a company you've heard of. So think of food brands that you buy. Think of car brands that you buy. Think of housing builders that you know of. All these sort of big major, Apple as well for technology companies, but Samsung, all these types of things. And then there's lots of these arms that come off them where they don't build everything. And so they support smaller economies, smaller businesses that feed into the big body in the middle. And if you take aim at the big body in the middle, you shut down the long tentacles that stretch out from that main body. And it's why you have to be so incredibly careful trying to navigate the regulations around cars, but also the regulations around lots of different industries. And if you're a bit hapsadaisical and you just swing an axe around, as most politicians seem to, because it sounds good when you try and get voted in, you'll end up costing a lot of people their jobs, because the only way for the octopus to survive is to cut off a couple of its limbs. And that means those limbs, they welt, they go away, they fly off, and that's the end of people's jobs. You have to be very, very careful in this if they aren't going to be able to be sort of amputated and put on to someone else. That's a reality of the system, unfortunately. So that's just a side note here that we are very reliant now on all of our suppliers, like most OEMs. So we've done our deals with them, and they said, yeah, we can supply this. Yeah, okay, fine. What are you using to power your car? And we said, well, we get a plug-in hybrid system and a combustion engine. They said, okay, you're making it yourself. And we've had a little look around the factory, and we don't have any people that are powertrain specialists. So we've gone out onto the open market. Now, we're very, very lucky because we decided to base our car in the UK. And there are probably only a handful of countries in the world that have enough technical expertise on hand at any given moment, not to say you couldn't train up a workforce, but on hand at any given moment to actually be able to work towards this goal and know what they're doing. So you've got the UK, because it's had a long established automotive industry. You've got Germany for very, very obvious reasons. The USA, again, for obvious reasons. Interestingly, Canada, partly because of their historic relationship with the USA, they have a lot of technical expertise in Canada too. France, Sweden, I could keep naming countries, but you get the idea that then you've got sort of Korea, China today, but probably not 10, 15 years ago, but today you have Japan, and then one or two other sort of well-known nations, and a few nations you may not expect, but that's kind of all we've got. And so we're fortunate. We've decided to put ourselves in a shed in somewhere in the UK. And so we've gone out to the market, and people have said, well, I've got very good jobs with, Toyota in the UK, Nissan, Honda, I think now has actually probably left the UK if they haven't already. I think they're planning to, because people made their job impossible, but there we go. Mini, and obviously that then extends you over to Germany, and there's a workforce all behind those companies. And that's without talking about Aston Martin and Land Rover, Jaguar, Lotus, etc. So we've gone out to the market, and these people have said, I kind of like my job, and I don't know, it's a bit of a risk coming to a new car company, so no thanks. And we've realised pretty quickly that even though it would technically be possible to build our own powertrains, it's just not a good idea. Not for a new car company. And there are very, very, very few car companies that actually do come out onto the market with their own powertrains. Now, it does give you more scalability because you're not reliant on someone else. But the best idea, at least at first, is to partner up with someone else who already has an engine. So we'll use the example of Ineos. They have two straight six 3-litre engines in their car. Both are sourced from BMW. One is a petrol engine, the magnificent B58. Lots of people have heard of the B58. It's the engine that's been in everything from the Toyota Supra to the BMW X5, the sort of M light versions of a lot of BMWs. So very well-known engine, they've got that, and they've also got the 3-litre diesel engine. And so we've had a look around at the market, and we've said, well, we need a hybrid. Let's call up Toyota. They might have a plug-in hybrid. And they said, well, yeah, we have lots of other agreements with lots of other car companies, and you're not Japanese, and sending them to you would take so long. We're not that interested. We've had a little chat with Land Rover, but again, they're going gangbusters with making their Range Rovers at the minute, and they just haven't got the spare capacity. Fortunately, somehow we've got friendly with someone from Volkswagen, and we've said, look, you've got these 2-litre turbo petrol engines with battery systems around 20 kilowatt hours. Can we please have at least some of them? And they've said, you know what? Actually, we do need to support these jobs. We're willing to supply you, but you need to sign up for a minimum amount, which has got us both shaking in our boots, because a new car company having to guarantee it will buy a certain amount of engines without actually having a car to put them in and any orders of these cars is pretty terrifying. Now, we've gone to our investors at this point, and our investors are all sat on the edge of their seat, excited about our car company, whilst also getting ready to fall off of it with laughter, because they don't really understand the car world, and all they understand is that combustion engines and hybrids are going to be banned as far as they're aware. You have to make it an EV, and they're putting a lot of pressure on us to make it an electric car. We've explained we don't think that's where we're going to be able to sell the most vehicles, and that's an extremely competitive end of the market to try and get into, because European manufacturers alone have lost 65 billion trying to get themselves sort of ingratiated with that market. And all of the new car manufacturers, especially from China, have got that bit covered. So they've accepted our hybrid idea, but they're a bit shaky on the combustion. But we've managed to get them around, and they've given us some extra money. So right now we have, and what I want to stress at this point, with all the talking I've done and all the picture I'm hoping I've painted for you, we don't have a car. We have the bits that you put in a car, but not an actual body or an underneath or anything. And we're going to get over to those people in a second, because to actually build a platform and a body, you need to understand what's going to go in it. So some of you would have heard Porsche, for example. So Porsche currently sell actually both an electric Macan and Cayenne. They were previously their best-selling models. That's correct. They are their best-selling cars in countries like China. Pretty much all they sold, and they were what you would refer to in business language as cash cows. So they did cost quite a lot to make, but you could sell them with thick profits in them, with lots of optional extras added to them, to a client base that was willing to spend the money, that loved your company, but for whatever reason wanted or needed an SUV. And so those, when they've released the electric versions, they made the platform and the body only able to accept an electric powertrain, i.e. its batteries all underneath or in a particular type of shape. And then they built the car around that. And now what they're having to do is go back on that and re-engineer a design that was never intended to carry an engine. And at this point, if you just imagine carrying an engine in a car is like just carrying a small crate that weighs 200-ish kilos, okay, or 400 odd pounds, or even heavier than that. sometimes maybe a bit lighter than that, but that gives you a rough idea. You've got to somehow put that in a car without the car falling over or just being terrible to drive. That takes a lot of work. And we're fortunate because we haven't at least made the mistake of making one car and then having to redesign it, because that's pretty much where you start saying we need to throw almost all of it away and start again. We're fortunate. We haven't got anywhere yet because we've gone into our engineers and they're throwing bricks at the design team who are throwing Molotov cocktails back at the engineers. And they're just in this wild battle in this very nice looking room that we've given them to design things in. And there's fantastic sketches on one side of the wall and technical drawings on the other side. And if you're a car nut, you could spend a good week in there just salivating over all the creations that have been made. But unfortunately, none of them go together. So, for example, the design team have got this lovely swooping bonnet design where the bonnet dips away and you can really see the road ahead of you for the sports car. The engineering team that are building a car to be driven say, well, then an engine has to go there, so it needs to be at least, let's just say, 45 centimetres higher than you've designed it at the tip. And then we have to have headlights that are within regulation for crash testing. You put them a bit too low, we need to rise them up. And they've basically taken a beautiful design of the styling team and made it look like something that is a cross between a frog and some other odd looking thing that you wouldn't really want to design a car around. Probably a frog and a fish. Let's put it that way. Because, by the way, a frog and a fish, they're pretty slippery. Yeah. And actually, if you were just designing a car for out and out sort of aerodynamic design, you use these sorts of animals. Whereas, because a lot of the design language is built off of pictures and things like that. And actually what people want is something that is basically a cross between a fighter jet and a lion bred with an eagle. That's kind of, what humans want. But if you design that, then you've got something that is probably £350,000 and has the word Lamborghini written on it. So we've got a big problem. The bigger problem is we've walked in and we've said, we have managed to get ourselves an engine. A hybrid powertrain for our SUV, and we've explained it's from Volkswagen. It's their 2-litre petrol matched up with about 20 kilowatt hours of battery, and the battery's probably going to have to go in the boot, so it's going to raise the boot line. So if you can design the chassis to be a bit deeper, so we don't have to have too small of a boot, we need it to be competitive, etc., etc. So the design team's throwing a hissy fit at this because they have this lovely svelte design at the rear, but they're willing to compromise, especially on the front where an engine now needs to go on the SUV. And then we've explained to them that we've done a brilliant deal and we've had a chat with Mercedes and we've managed to secure their V8 engine. But what we found is that is going to rise the price of the car so much that our sports car is now £100,000. So we've had another think about it. We've gone back to Mercedes and we've asked to borrow their V6 engine. Now, unfortunately, our sports car is now already, with all its radars and its gubbins from every single place and its brakes from Brembo and its Bosch ECUs and its Koenigsegg suspension, even with the V6 engine rather than fantastic V8 engine, it's going to be £60,000 for us to even dream of breaking even on this sort of sports car design that we've had. And so our accountants have come in and they've kicked us in the shins and they said, you can't make a sports car. You just can't. The thing's going to be too expensive. You're basically trying to battle with a Porsche 911. You're going to lose. You're not going to make any money. And we need you to actually do something right here. And so, in our view, you have to make it 4 doors, able to carry more than 2 people in it, and do something sort of sporty-ish. And they've pointed out cars like the BMW 8 Series Gran Coupe, Mercedes AMG GT Gran Coupe design, etc. And we're not very happy about this, but we are interested in trying to make some money and not going out of business in the next 10 days. So we've agreed. And we've managed to fit this V6 engine in some sort of front-end design that goes with that for our sporty-ish car. But we've got another problem. And that's that the engineering team, having looked at the design of the engine that we've managed to secure, have said, well, the anchor points for that engine will design, basically they will change the design of the front end, but we have to anchor the engine into the car. It has to be mounted in a particular way, and then the gearbox has to go through the chassis in a particular way, and that's going to dictate where the front wheels go. Now, the design team are ripping their designs to pieces and screaming at us on the other side, because beautiful designs now are being trashed by the fact that we cannot fit the engine and the gearbox in their design and make the car turn around a corner. We put all their heads together, and wouldn't you know it, they've managed to find an agreement, and that's basically, we're going to have a vehicle that looks a lot like a Mercedes AMG GT Grand Coupe. And the bigger problem is that the engineering team have now shown us how much it's going to cost for us to actually make that platform underneath it. Now, we've collapsed off our chairs and been unconscious for about 15 minutes at this point, and we've been fanned awake, and we've looked at the numbers, and we've accepted at this point that our lovely custom designed sports car, we're not even talking about the SUV, by the way, at this point, our lovely custom designed sports car is going to be £150,000, if not more. And so we've called up Mercedes again, and we've said, look, we want to be luxury-ish, performance-ish, but we have to try and be affordable to some extent. Now, the lovely people at Mercedes are having a little bit of a giggle at us down the phone, and they're saying, well, I think what you want is what everyone would like to make, but no one can. And we said, look, we're already buying your engine. Can we buy off you the platform underneath the car and not have to make it ourselves, and instead just design the body? And Mercedes have been fantastic to us. We obviously have, they obviously really like us as people, because they've decided, yes, not only can we have their engine, but as long as we don't make it with a V8, because they already sell a car with the body, but with a V8 engine, they're saying you can have the V6. It doesn't directly compete with us, but we're going to put a caveat in, and that's that your car has to be under £80,000, because if you're above that, you start stepping into our territory. And so before we have a car, we are already hamstrung in the design of the underside, the engine, the technology it has, the headlight position, the tail light position, and how much we can sell it for. And that's all. Some of that is just regular business agreements. A lot of that goes on. And other parts of it is regulators just kicking us in the shins constantly. And so we've gone back to the drawing board on our sports car, and there is an exemption we're aware of. And if you've heard of Morgan, who buy their engines from BMW, like the Ineos do, they've decided to build a limited run of cars, and that puts them in an exemption zone, which basically says, because they're such a small manufacturer, they don't have to comply to all the latest regulations on emissions and safety equipment. They still have to be relatively safe and be as low emissions as possible, but it's accepted that so few of them are going to be built that it doesn't move the needle really on, and people are generally going to be buying them to drive at a weekend. And we've looked at that option very, very seriously. It goes completely against what we started this idea of a car company for. And so, with a heavy heart, we've decided not to limit ourselves to 1,000 cars, but to agree to Mercedes terms. And looking at how much we now have to spend to buy all the parts to put this sort of Frankenstein car together, we're just going to talk to our team for design of the sporty car, and we're going to let the engineers design us an SUV. And we're saying to them, look, forget about how it looks. At this point, we need to get as cheap as possible vehicle out there that looks somewhat acceptable to the market, and we're going to have a good looking sports car, and hopefully this will balance off. Now, if you're sat there scratching your head thinking, who puts a Mercedes engine in a sports car and also has an SUV, and one of them is kind of in with the way the company has built cars for a very long time, but the other one isn't? What company does that sound like? Lotus. So what's funny is, as I've gone through this, and I've been researching it for a few weeks in preparation for this podcast, and thought to myself, okay, well, you'd have to do this, and then you'd have to do this, and then you'd have to do this, and you'd be restricted by this, and if you use this, then you've got to use this gearbox, etc. And then I realised I am just describing the story of several different car companies over the last decade. And it's both funny, sad, and quite inspiring that despite the odds stacked so far against many manufacturers, they actually do exist. That, I think, is something, as if you're a car enthusiast, you should just be proud of these companies actually bringing anything to market under these circumstances. We have never seen regulations kick car companies in the shins so hard, no matter which way they turn, and yet we still have, for the car enthusiast world, some sporty cars that exist. Yes, they're expensive. Yes, they're not what we want, because we all want fantastic screaming V8s that, are fantastic to drive on a weekend, but they just aren't realistic under the current rules and regulations, and also what the market demands at certain price points. We are in a very different world to the world where hot hatches used to be £15,000, and the people buying them were likely in their 20s and would make pretty colossal allowances for car companies because they'd slept on their mate's sofa last week, and the idea of being comfortable wasn't that important, or NVH engineering, or trying to get, the last nth of luxury into a car. Does it go quickly? That was the question. And that was the answer of the hot hatch era that has now passed us. And we now live in an era of £40,000 Golf GTIs that, for the most part, the younger audience of car enthusiasts coming through are not able to buy. So we've got back to our car, and we've got a big problem in that our Mercedes engine, we've called up Bosch, who are going to give us an ECU for it. And Mercedes said, well, we actually use someone else, but it's fine, Bosch can do it. But the gearbox needs to be matched up to the engine, not just from an engine management point of view, but it physically needs to fit. And you're going to have to call up our gearbox supplier, because we don't think anyone else can make one unless it's a custom design. So we've gone back to our engineers, who are fantastic people. They're not having to do as much work as they thought they would when they signed up and left their great jobs in whatever whatever car company they were in, but they are getting to engineer some bits around the edges of an engine. And just to highlight how much goes into making a combustion engine and why so many entrants today are just ignoring it entirely. To design an engine, you don't just need the block and the cylinders and a crankshaft and a head on top of it and an oil pan beneath it and some other auxiliary parts. You need little fiddly things like, how is a coolant pipe going to be shaped to get it from an engine to a radiator or an intercooler? How is the turbocharger going to fit in the chassis? And what piping is going to be both optimal for the design of the chassis around it, but also optimal for airflow to make the thing as fast as possible or as efficient as possible? So our guys and gals, they are designing really a lot of pipe work for us, because we bought an engine from someone else, but it's still got to work in our chassis. Now, we've bought the chassis from someone else as well. So, a lot of the parts from, in this case, we're using Mercedes as an example, we can use a lot of their parts. But we're not trying to build a carbon copy here. We are trying to build some unique aspects to our car. Think about when Pagani made the first Zonda. They may have had an engine from Mercedes, but no one got in a Pagani and thought, this looks like a Mercedes. And so we've gone to our engineers and we said, good, we've got a sports car. You're going on with that design. We're sounding a little bit like Lotus, but we're not going to make an electric SUV, because we know what Lotus had to do, which was, after a considerable amount of time of trying to sell an EV, they had to then redesign the chassis to accept a hybrid platform. So we're going straight in with the hybrids. So maybe we'll get lucky. We've got our 2-litre engine, sounding very much like Lotus again, because they've fitted a 4-cylinder 2-litre engine to their hybrid. Although just to point out an interesting aspect to the Lotus hybrid SUV, the battery is massive. I think it's the biggest battery that I know of fitted to a hybrid car, because essentially it's the EV with some of the batteries taken out and a small as they can fit engine put into the car. Just as an interesting aside. Well, we're designing a clean sheet design, but we've got quite a problem actually, which is that the engineers have said, well, fantastic, we can, design around that engine and that hybrid system, and we've got something that works. And we've used some inspiration from the Porsche Cayenne, but we've mixed it in with a Land Rover Defender, because that kind of answers a lot of questions. And we are sat there thinking, excellent, the market is going to love this. And they said, there's only one problem really, and that's that the aerodynamics of this vehicle, well, they're a bit boxy. And we tried to put in a little bit more Land Rover than we did Porsche, and so it's not that efficient. And we've had a look at the numbers on a test rig, and we're going to be one of the least efficient hybrids on sale. And we're also going over budget. So again, we go back to our boardroom with our heads in our hands, looking at our two cars, struggling to get them off the ground. And what we realise, what we really need, is to make sure that we're heading in the right direction here. And so we don't need to worry too much about tooling up a factory for our sporty car, okay? Because we're buying a lot of it from another manufacturer. And then we're going to sort of put our own design language to the exterior and critically the interior. But we are going to need a factory to build all of this stuff that isn't, is custom to us. And so we've gone around and we bought a factory, and now we're looking at the tooling for that factory. And again, we're not looking at our sports car, we're just looking at our SUV here. And what we're realizing is that it's very, very, very expensive to create tooling for a one-off custom car that isn't sharing parts with anything else. The only example I could think of here in the current car market is the Aston Martin DBX. It's not a Mercedes underneath. It has a lot of Mercedes parts in it, including the engine. But Aston Martin decided on the DBX they wouldn't just take a Mercedes SUV and stick, an Aston Martin badge on the front of it. Probably could have made a lot more money doing so, but fair play to Lawrence Stroll and all the people that own the company and the engineers there. They said that's not what really Aston Martin is all about. But there aren't many examples apart from that. Most, in fact, SUVs, they're one of the reasons they are so profitable, even for whether you're a luxury or a sort of middle-of-the-road manufacturer, is because you can build several SUVs off of the same platform, which means you're only designing one car, you're just putting different bodies on them. With the Porsche Cayenne, for example, now that gets mistaken a lot of the time for sharing a chassis with the Volkswagen Touareg and the Audi Q7 and the Lamborghini Urus and the Bentley Bentayga. Actually, it's a logic that is shared. And I'm not going to go too far into that because it really deserves its own sort of podcast or episode on the main channel. But essentially, it's highly customizable. What they really have done is establish zones of the car that are already sort of engineered and can be just picked off and put in place to hold, for example, an engine in place, to put the steering wheel, to put the seats, to put the rear of the car and mount the subframe for the rear wheels too. So it's just an ideology behind how you're going to build it, which saves a huge amount of money, which we're facing right now. However, somehow we've leapt through that hurdle and we're getting tooled up to build our SUV. And we're doing a custom design. Now, our styling team haven't had as much input as they would have liked to our SUV. We've really gone down the idea of a wind tunnel because our original design, which was a bit Land Rover-y, which we knew the market would like, and a bit Porsche-ish, which is a bit of a Franken car, but we hoped would do well, it's just not going to be efficient enough on paper for its fuel economy, it's not going to be fast enough, and it's not going to have enough range. So instead, we've spent quite a lot of time in a wind tunnel, and we've found a design that at least works from the point of view of optimizing the figures. Fantastic. fantastic. We are almost there to the point where we have 2 cars ready to dummy. We're not going to have a built car that runs, but we're going to have a car put together, and we're going to be able to take it to a car show. So we've established now our headquarters. We've got a factory underneath us. We've got people there dedicated to making specific parts for our car. And we have an exterior body for 2 cars. One of them looks a bit like a Mercedes, but it's all right. We'll get around that. The press have already talked about the fact that we don't have our own engines. So what can we really do that Mercedes and Volkswagen can't already? So we're taking a little bit of heat, but we're saying we're so magnificent that we've managed to do things with these powertrains that Mercedes and Volkswagen haven't. Now, I haven't done anything with them yet because we're just trying to take something to market that actually could function, not actually does function. We've secured our suppliers, we've got our investment, we've got a model put together, and we have 2 cars with no interiors, but that actually have all the things in the right places. They just need some seats and then a lot of electrics and other bits put in them, and they could actually run. And critically, we've checked with all our regulations, we will be legal to sell them in China, in Europe, and in North America. So we've swept our sweat off of our brows, and we are now heading to the Geneva Motor Show, where we've rolled in our 2 creations. And around us, there are 150 different manufacturers, many of them new to the industry. And we're looking around, and our shoulders are slumping. Our eyes are falling, and we're seeing car journalists from all parts of the different industries around the automotive world. We're seeing some people who are allowed into the motor show already, and it's 7:30 in the morning. And we can see that no one is really hanging around our tent. And we're getting a little bit worried, but fortunately, we've got some friends in the car industry world, and so they've sent over a couple of journalists our way. And so we're quite happy to actually be talking to at least someone. And they've said, "Oh, what does that look like? That looks a bit like a Mercedes." And we say, well, yes, it will look a bit like a Mercedes because it is underneath a Mercedes, but we've made some huge differences to it that differentiate our car. How much is it going to be? And we haven't actually decided on a price yet, but it is going to be, in our words, and actually this is the words you'll find of most car company CEOs, competitive on the market. Yeah. Have a bit of that. Competitive on the market. Not competitive for people's salaries. They might be able to afford it. Just, we've looked around at what other people are trying to get for their stuff, and we're trying to sell it at that money. A bit like how supermarkets work, really. Sort of disconnect yourself from the economies of the world, have a look at what your mate's selling, and then try and get the same money for it. And then, wait and see if the market accepts that price. And if it doesn't, go back to your suppliers and see if you can get a better deal. We can't really do that because we are completely stuck by the fact we're buying in a lot of our stuff. This is where we do separate ourselves from companies like Ineos, for example, who may buy their engine from BMW and have to have the same gearbox, and that then dictates some of the electronics they need to use. But the actual chassis that they've designed is theirs. And because it's such a big vehicle, they've been able to put loads of bits in there that is completely custom to them. If we then look over at manufacturers like Aston Martin, well, they turned up with their hottest and latest supercars, and they've put the DBX at the back, and they've sort of said, look, we've got a new special unveil that we'll do later this afternoon. Don't look at that car yet. Look at our fantastic, sporty, fast-looking vehicles. And that's attracted a lot of photographers to come over there, and they're all heading there at 4 o'clock to hear about the latest SUV, which is essentially going to be similar to the old SUV, hotted up a little bit, and we'll definitely get a load of orders for it. And we're getting a little bit more nervous now because we've got an SUV and no one's talking about it. And people have asked us, well, it looks pretty good. It's quite unique looking because we've been able to design it in a wind tunnel, which we somehow got the money for. Maybe we just borrowed it off Formula One team or something. And because we've got a 2-litre engine from Volkswagen with their hybrid system, We've had to take some of their equipment, but not loads of it because it's a relatively small engine in engine terminology. It's not a V10 or a V8 or a V12, and the battery pack's not particularly large, so we haven't had to design too much around that. And we're getting asked the question, well, how much will that be? And we're looking around and we're saying, well, Range Rovers are £100,000, and the Aston Martin DBX is like £150,000, and the Bentley Bentayga is like £200,000. And they're saying to us, yeah, but the JQ7 over there, for example, is £35,000, and on paper that seems to be pretty much similar to your car, and that has winded us pretty badly because we were hoping we weren't going to be competing with a Chinese manufacturer like the JQ7, because obviously that's going to undercut us on price. And so we've made some pretty bold statements at this car show that you may not be able to see the interiors of our cars, but if you look over at who we consider our competitors, the physical controls, the buttons, the textures of the interior materials, that is what our audience are very interested in. Now, we're bluffing here because people have walked up to our cars, gone, and then walked over to all the other car companies and said, So we haven't actually got anyone that interested, but we are, if anything, much like the British story and what Brits always love is an underdog that's peppy and hopeful. So we're peppy and hopeful, and we've made some pretty bold statements. And our engineers are back at the factory, and they've heard our statements on the interior, and 2 of them are crying, 1 of them has punched the wall, and 3 of them are threatening to resign. And we don't understand what we've said. And they said, well, the interiors of these cars need to be incredibly simple because we've spent all of our money on trying to get ourselves off the ground with our SUV, having to design systems around other people's powertrains, which has cost us quite a lot more money than you expected. And those car companies, they just are sticking everything through a screen for the most part. Yeah, there's a few buttons, but not something we can really uniquely do much with, not unless you want to spend a lot more money and do a custom interior. And that's going to mean we're going to have to call up our suppliers like Bosch and say, well, we're buying a few things off the shelf from you, but I don't suppose you could make some things custom for us, could you? Because we need to have a lot of manual controls because that's what we've promised to the market. And they said, of course we can do it. Not a problem. Take us a couple of years. And we've said we haven't got a couple of years. We're already promised this car's going to be out in 6 months. They've said, we understand you're asking a lot of us, but if you're willing to pay, we can put an engineering team just on this project and they'll be able to work sort of around the clock, in shifts, and we can get it done. Now, we're pretty shaky. We've run back to our investors and we've asked for more money. They've pretty much had enough of us by this point because we've asked them for so much money that it's pretty much impossible that we'll ever make our money back from selling these 2 cars. And the entire hope of our company as it stands is on future income. Now, if that sounds similar, that's pretty much the inception story of Tesla, that they'd spent a lot of money designing, the first ever mass-produced EV that would come to market and change the market. Whatever you may think of Elon Musk, the team at Tesla did get over the sort of the big jump there, and they did get a car to market, even with basically having to do it all from scratch. I mean, all the bits I've brought up here, they didn't contend with. They had to build a car from scratch, but they put everything through a screen. For example, they did other cost-cutting features by saying we're just building a tech car, so it doesn't need to have all these fancy things. It just needs to have touch screens. The investors behind it said, we think in 10 years, because you're going to sell so few in year 1, 2, and 3, it will take that long to make your money back, but we're willing to give you the money because we think in 10 years or 12 years, if the regulations go the right way, you will make your money. Now, Tesla today is so, I'm not going to go into their financial story, but we know it's wildly overvalued. From the point of view of the entire car market is worth less than Tesla. And most investors, the ones that are actually paying attention and not sort of playing in the casino of Tesla stocks, have said, yes, well, it's all on the idea of future earnings. And that's why, the valuation is so high, because we think whatever the market may do, Tesla will lead the way if we all have to go electric. We've gone to our investors and we've said, well, look, we think we're going to argue here and we're going to say that hybrids are the future. And that we've got 50 years of selling hybrids ahead of us because regulators will bend to the will of the market. And our SUV actually has got some interest in it. We're lying through our teeth, but our investors don't care. We're saying what we want them to hear. And they've said, well, yes, okay, your first 2 cars probably will be horrific losses. But if the market likes you, they probably will buy your 3rd or 4th or maybe your 5th car that you release in, say, 10 years' time. And if you do that one right, and you can use a lot of the similar technological advances you've already made for a decade, maybe you will be profitable. So they've given us a load of money and we're really, really happy. And we've gone quite literally dancing out of their boardroom, and they're starting to think that we might just be crazy. But you know, they've got money to burn, we've got time to burn, so let's get on with it. We've gone back to our engineers. Bosch are doing us an ECU that means we can have physical dials and controls on our interior, and this is fantastic because we are going to stand out in this car market. We are going to have a car where you can turn a little dial and the temperature changes. We're going to have another dial and the fan speed changes. We're going to have this crazy thing called a volume knob. It is wild, groundbreaking, apart from the last 100 years of cars. But the moment that we are now in is deciding whether we do this for both cars or just one. Do we argue that the Mercedes one, for example, the sports car, is such a low seller that we should just use Mercedes systems? Do we design all the systems solely for our SUV and then chuck them over and use whatever we can in our sort of sporty car that's a Mercedes underneath? And we realize we can't do that because the systems that run the engines and all the computers, one of them is from Volkswagen, one of them is from Mercedes. They don't talk to each other. And so we're going to have to design 2 different systems. We really should have thought about this before we did our deals, because we probably should have just bought both the powertrains from the same manufacturer. And that is the story of most new car companies doing this. It's why Ineos have BMW 3-litre diesel, 3-litre petrol. At least you don't have to do everything twice. But we're a bit silly and we don't know what we're doing. So we're going to have to do this twice. And we have decided, you know what? The sports car, it's all about the drive. So we've spoken to Koenigsegg again. We've given them some extra money and we said, can you make us an adjustable racetrack setup that somehow will blow the socks off of car journalists and that people who are big car enthusiasts will love, and they will forgive us for having to have most of the controls through a screen that's very similar to Mercedes. But on our SUV, we're going to do a lot of custom interior controls different to Volkswagen. Now, Volkswagen have heard this, and they've launched a load of new cars, including the ID3 Neo, which, just to bring it into the real world for a minute, they just launched and they brought a load of buttons back for. So our moment of looking completely unique in the industry has had its moment of glory set on fire because other manufacturers are doing it. But we're going to steamroll ahead and do what all car manufacturers do when they're caught in a corner. And let's just keep saying the same thing over and over again and hope that an audience appears as we say we're making something different, even if we may not be. So we've turned up, we've got our car, we've got our individual-ish SUV, we've got our essentially Mercedes rebadged and redesigned sports car, and we are finally going to market. We've solved, this is a critical part actually, that we should have thought about in the beginning, but we think we've managed to do. And that's that in the car market, when I sold cars, I had a very good sales manager, my first ever sales manager, who hired me. He hired me solely for the reason that I understood the game of snooker because I'd been playing it all summer long with some mates, and he was a big fan of snooker. And he asked me what my break was, and I lied, and he was impressed by that, and so he hired me. There you go. I was only 18 at the time, but I wanted to impress him, so I said it was quite low, and quite high, and it wasn't. Anyway, so he hired me, and he taught me the rules of life when it comes to selling cars. And the first thing he said is, you are not here to sell someone a thing. He said, you are here to sell them what they want but critically, what they need. Okay, so if you think about it this way, we do buy things in life that we just want. If you want a Starbucks coffee right now, it could be £10. I mean, they are expensive already. But if you really want one, you'll find an excuse. You're treating yourself because it's payday, or, you go to a really nice bar or a really nice restaurant and you buy a nice meal that is very expensive, but you justify it in your head. It's something you want and you deserve it for X, Y, Z. There's other things in life you need. So heating for your house, a roof over your head, transportation to get yourself to your work and back, some form of food to eat to survive, and water and all these other things. In the car world, you sell firstly to that need, then you sell to the want. That does get reversed for certain cars. So for example, if someone comes in, as I said, people that were buying MX-5s off me brand new, they were buying a car they wanted. They didn't need an MX-5. Friends of mine that have worked for Porsche and for some of the bigger specialist car brands, they would sell to needs. And when I went into specialist cars, I almost never, ever sold to needs. I only ever sold to wants. Okay, so there is a difference. And if you're going to work in the car industry, or in any industry actually, it's something you really have to understand. Now, we've decided in our little example here to sell to a need and a want. So the car that is a sporty car is something we think people want. The SUV is what we think people need. The trouble is, we've designed an SUV that's pretty expensive, it's pretty unique, and the only people that are going to really appreciate that are car enthusiasts, and those car enthusiasts are looking at our sports car. And the crossover exists. For example, Porsche sell lots of Cayennes and Macans because people grew up thinking, I would love to own a 911. That would be my dream. Or I would love to have a Porsche Cayman or a Boxster. That's their car that they had seen in a magazine as a young boy or girl. Or when they were 25, their boss had one and they thought, one day I'm going to make it and buy one of those. And then reality of life catches up with them and they finally get to the point where they can afford it and they say, actually, maybe the sports car's a bit too uncomfortable. Maybe they've got a bad knee. And so they wanted the sports car, but what they needed is the SUV. And so they bought the SUV. And we're trying to do that off the bat here from scratch. And it's quite a difficult thing to do because you need a market of people that have dreamed of your car. And it's where, for example, today, if we look at the average cars, Toyota Corolla, Volkswagen Golf, these are two very popular cars throughout the world, and they really sell to a need rather than a want. They're 5-door hatchbacks with reasonably sized boots, reasonably reliable, last a very long period of time if you service them, and hold their value pretty well, which means their cost to own is relatively low. They don't ask too much of owners. You don't need to, if you just buy an average sort of 1.5 petrol one, you just put fuel in it. Every year you service it. That's it. You don't need to worry about how much charge it has. And if you're stuck having to park 3 streets over from your house one night and you can't charge it, it's no big deal. You just put petrol in it the next day. The same for if you want to keep it clean or you want to resell it in 3 years' time. It's not got a degraded battery because it's just got a petrol engine in it. And that's not me making an argument against EVs. It's sort of explaining why the market does surround cars like that. It just fits a lot of people's needs. Now, when you get to wants, you start to look at the GR Corolla that is not sold in the UK, but is sold over in the US, and cars like the Golf GTI and Golf R. And that's just the step-up version of these two cars. There obviously is a whole car landscape around it. What we've done here is we've tried to ignore that market because we've thought, well, we would rather build something that enthusiasts will end up buying. But as you've noted along this whole journey so far, where we've been hemmed in is through regulations. And we're going to have to now jump an even bigger one. And that is safety testing. You see, In Europe, we have Euro NCAP. America has both the NHTSA and IIHS, who can do crash testing. The Aussie New Zealander ANCAP, so basically is essentially Euro NCAP. For a lot of cars, they just share findings and information, but they do also do their own crash testing for some vehicles. And we've gone to these bodies and we've said, we're planning to sell a car and we would like to get a crash safety certificate. And they said, well, that's very good, because that means if you get a crash safety certificate from us, you'll be able to just give that over to certain regulators. Instead of having to prove anything about your car, you can just say it's actually passed crash safety testing, and because it has, you don't have to go and prove loads of other bits about it. For example, the position of your headlights. Regulations actually decide some of that, not all of it, but some of where they can be, what the beam angle is, etc. Now, the crash safety testing will look at the car's headlights. It'll also see how the car crashes, how the car's wheels act when it crashes, all the energy that they dissipate, the same with the front bumper. And there are some regulations that say you need to have a certain level of crumple zone, etc. You can use the safety certificate. So we've gone along and we've built 2 running cars. Now, we're pretty nervous about having them smashed into a wall because they're the only 2 cars we've got. But the factory is hard at work to get us 5 more, because the crash safety testing standards have said to us we need to crash several cars. And because we don't share a platform under our 2 cars, we need to do 2 separate crashes. So you need to crash one, then crash the other, then we need to crash them both again. If you build a car off the exact same platform, it's just the body you change, you don't always have to do all of the crash testing for both, because you've kind of proven that the structure underneath is able to take the crash. And so there's certain ones. The best example, if you go on Euro NCAP and look at the latest Range Rovers, the Range Rover Sport only did some of the crash testing because the full-size Range Rover did all of the crash testing, and because the platform underneath was similar, they were able to use some, not all of them, but a few of the tests of the main Range Rover to just prove that, look, underneath these cars are so similar, the crash would be almost identical, if not identical. And the safety bodies look at the engineering and they have agreed with that. But we don't have that luxury, so we're going to have to crash sort of 4 or 5 cars here that have cost us money. And we've got a bigger problem. You see, in the US, crash safety testing is different to Europe. There is some similarities, but it is different. And one of the differences is that there is a state in the US, and I've forgotten which state it is, where it is illegal to not wear a seatbelt, but you can't be pulled over for it. And that means that you have to do crash safety testing for an unbelted occupant, i.e. the driver. Now, this adds a whole heap of additional challenges to engineering a car, because really you engineer it around the airbags and the seatbelt. And again, we're talking about things here that you're going to have to buy. Yeah, seatbelts from someone, safety systems from someone, and they're going to have to interact with your radars, with your crash sensors, and it's all going to have to work together. So a lot of money is about to be spent here just breaking things. The problem is, if you do all of that and then you try and crash test it for an unbelted occupant, the result is going to be quite dramatically different. There are ways around it, but if you have seen the Alpina A110, okay, there is a reason why that car is not sold in the US, and that's because it would need quite dramatic modifications to its roofline, and I think to the windscreen as well, and I think the A-pillars, for it to be able to pass that unbelted safety test. And so they're not selling it there. The Jaguar F-Type is there's a great example in this car, in that if you watch a channel called Harry's Garage, you'll know he has a Jaguar F-Type project. I think that's the Project 7. So he has both. He has the X E, which I think is the Project 8, and then the XF, which is the Project 7. I think I'm right there. It could be the other way around, but I'm pretty sure that's the way around it is. And the Project 7 is essentially a customized F-Type. So it's a very special version of it, and it has a chopped down windscreen along with specific seats and some other areas that were changed from the standard F-Type. So what it is not, at least in the UK and a lot of Europe, is an F-Type with some stickers and, some spoilers and different wheels. It is not that. It is truly a differently engineered car from the point of view of its certain aspects of it. Some of it are, of course, a lot of it is the same, but some of it is actually different. If you buy that car in the USA, it is actually essentially the same as the F-Type, because they were not able to sell it with the chopped down windscreen and with its different seats and all these other things. And again, I think on the Harry's Garage video, if you watch it, I think he explains some of this. But essentially, it would never have passed crash testing with its chopped down screen. It would have had to repass all of it all over again, and it's unlikely that it would have passed. And so what they did is they sold its own US specific version of the Project 7, which is closer to the original F-Type, if not very, very close to the original F-Type. And so we've got a problem. Our sports car, as much as it's been built around a Mercedes design, we've changed lots of it to try and make it unique. And we're now struggling to get past the unbelted safety testing in the US. So we've gone back to our investors, who by this time are pretty much sick of seeing us enter their room with our pockets turned out, begging for additional money. But if you've ever heard that, there's a great saying of, if you owe the bank money, if you owe the bank, £100, it's your problem. If you owe the bank £100 million, it's their problem. We're so deep into this now that we're being lent the additional money to get our car over the line, because we've made the point, if we don't sell it in the US, we're finished. So, and added to that, we need to change a few things for the Chinese market, because the Chinese market have their own testing, very similar in both emissions testing to Europe, but also crash testing. It's not a carbon copy, but it is similar. And their standards have got stricter and stricter in a much shorter time span. So I think we're on China 7 emissions. In Europe, we're still on Euro 6, but we're on a specific version of it, just as an aside. And because we're using engines that are not ours, we're pretty confident we're going to get through the emissions testing in all the key markets. And we've called up the Australians and they've said, mate, if you can make it pass in Europe, you can sell it here. So thumbs up all around. And the South Africans have said the same to us. So we're doing well. We've gone to the one of the Middle Eastern shows now with our car, freshly crashed, with a certificate. And we're starting to get agreement from countries that we can sell it. And this is where this podcast is going to end, because we're going to get on next to the dealer network, getting leasing companies, getting finance companies to agree with selling us, getting reviews from journalists, and doing the other side of the coin. But the last bit we're going to mention is we've got our car to market. We've got a few prospective buyers. We are showing it in the key markets around the world, the US. We've gone to Geneva in Europe. We've also gone to the German, the Frankfurt Motor Show. We've gone to one in the UK. We've gone to Goodwood in the UK. Somehow we've managed to wrangle our way there. And now our next major market to jump into will be China. China has said to us, you can get stuffed if you're not building it here. We're not having you in, which is a bit of a problem if we're going to sell there. So we've explained to them what we're doing, and we've managed to come up with some sort of agreement. We're probably going to have to hand over a lot of our intellectual property, but because most of it isn't ours anyway, it's not really a big problem for us. So at this point, it's not looking too bad. We don't exactly have a guaranteed future ahead of us, but people are starting to talk about us. We have 2 cars here, and we're talking about a third, which will be a completely custom vehicle to ourselves, because now that we've actually got this far and our investors have backed us this far, the market is accepting we are going to be selling cars. And people who are working for us are talking about staying with the company, being here for the long term, and maybe making a third car. But we still have lots of hoops to jump through, and that's to actually get these cars sold, because while we've legally been able to start selling them in certain countries and we were opening order books all over around the place, we've still got some pretty big hurdles to jump, and that will come in the next podcast. I hope you've enjoyed this one. I'm going to do the questions that we've had on the main channel. So if you've never seen the Miles Driven before, go over to that channel, subscribe to it, check it out. If this is your first time listening to the Miles Driven, make sure on the podcast you give it a follow. And if you want to send a question in, you can either do it at contact@themilesdriven.com, or you can go onto the YouTube page, or you can just go under this video, put in a question, and I'll try and get it answered on the next podcast. But the ones I have are from the main channel. The first one is from at Atan Barakatan. Hopefully I've said that right. 338. It's about to trade in a 2012 Cayenne Turbo. I'm torn between a 2014 Panamera Turbo with 100,000 miles on it versus a 2015 Panamera Turbo, Turbo S, with 173,000 miles on it, both with PDK, both with excellent service history, both at around 20,000. It doesn't say pounds or dollars. I'm going to guess dollars. Any thoughts? Now, I did answer this question on the channel. I think it was on one of the buyer's guides. I think it was the Cayenne buyer's guides, or it was probably actually it was the Panamera buyer's guide. And I said, so two critical things to be aware of in this one. Porsche, when it comes to Turbo and Turbo S, they do not just remap or adjust the engine. They go in and do some re-engineering. In this case, I listed it there, but I think it's different pistons. It's a different turbocharger setup. I think the turbo is only mildly changed, but it is different. And there's a couple of other little bits around cooling. So it isn't just, you could remap, take it to your favorite tuner and you'll have a Turbo S. You would probably have very similar power though. And I said, with that sort of mileage, given that the Panamera Turbo is already such a capable vehicle, I would rather have a car that's got half the mileage on it than step up to the Turbo S, which adds complexity, adds rarity, and at nearly 200,000 miles, appreciate it's been very well kept. And if it was on its own, I'd answer this question differently. But the fact that there is a turbo there with 100,000 miles on it that you're saying has been well kept, that would probably take my pick. The second one is from Chris H N Ing. Hopefully I've got that right. Hey Miles, would you recommend the 2022 Touareg 3-litre hybrid? Is it a good choice to buy second hand with over 50,000 kilometers? So the great thing about a 2022 Touareg with a 3-litre hybrid engine, it's still being sold today. The Touareg will exit service, I think 2026 will be its last year, but it didn't get a larger battery put in it. So I think most of the Volkswagen Group cars that had that 3-litre get, I think, a 25 kilowatt hour battery. But this one, I think, has the 17 kilowatt hour battery. And it's, for whatever reason, with the Touareg, they kept that all the way up to today. So you're not losing out by buying a 2022 over buying, say, a 2024, 2025, or a brand new one. And so far, there is a guide on the channel, by the way, for that Touareg, so you can check that out. But so far, that engine's been pretty good. And because of the hybrid system, most owners seem pretty happy with it. And 50,000 kilometers, about 30,000, 35,000 miles, is not that high. So, yeah, as long as it's been well kept, I would see if I could get an additional warranty on the hybrid system, because it's 2022, it's probably only got about 2 years left, maybe a bit less. And then it's going to run out of its battery warranty. So that would be one sort of big factor for me. I'd want to get, not because they're known to fail, just it's an expensive thing if it does fail. And then last one, which is Democracy Manifest 99. This was on one of the other videos I've done on the Miles Driven, where I was talking about car pricing. And he said, I think cars are way too expensive nowadays. And as you said, even the less popular or cheaper hot hatches are the same price for what I paid for my S3 at £40,000. I owned a 2014 S3, sadly, category S. That's an insurance write-off after 11 years of ownership, and loved that car. That era of car was the perfect balance between safety and fun. I am going to be doing a video on the main channel talking about brand new versus 10-year-old cars, and were cars better 10 years ago? And I think that'll be an interesting video for a lot of you. That look, I've got a real soft spot for S3s. A few of you will know I've had a couple of them. And it makes a really good point that years ago, £40,000, that was exceptional to spend on a hot hatch. Really, it was only the Audi S3, and then it followed up with the Mercedes A-Class, the A45 AMG. Those were the only ones really that were demanding that level of money. The Golf R then sort of stepped up there, and since we've had others. But now you look at the price of hot hatchbacks, and that's kind of where they're at. Not for the top end, but just for hot hatches. And it is a shame, because I don't think the loss is so much people who are, say, maybe if you're a bit older and you've had hot hatches all through your young years and your family years, and now you're a bit older, possibly you're a market that can still just about stretch the finance payment. But 20-year-olds, 25-year-olds, it's a dead market. And those are the people that need to be buying these cars instead of running around in 15-year-old ones, because what will likely happen is there's a whole group of people that need to enter the car enthusiast world who may never do so, because everything is so unattainable for them. And so, not to say, people that are older, it's necessarily the same. I know everyone's got their own cost of living issues, but I just think, I look at when I was 18, 19, I was selling cars. Okay, I was earning a bit more money. I was willing to spend all my money on cars too. And I'm not sure it was realistic, if I looked at the age cars I was buying and the type of cars I was buying, that a 19-year-old could do it today. Not just because of insurance, but because actually being able to afford them would be really, really difficult. And it sort of butts up against that part of me that says, it's become more and more difficult to afford everything in life. Are cars really where you want to spend your money? If you're in Car Enthusiast and that's what makes you happy, the answer is probably yes. But it is becoming a colossal amount of people's salary to be able to afford a nice car. And some people I know who really do earn good money don't drive the cars they would want to drive, because it simply is out of their ability for each month to take out of their family household. So I completely agree. I think this podcast has probably pointed out the challenges for manufacturers and why cars have got so expensive. And, I think we just have to hope that somehow in the next few years, a way to get the cost of building these newer era of cars comes down so far that we can see the introduction of cheaper end cars. The Polo GTI, I brought that up in this video this comment was on. I said that's now a £30,000 car, and I would love to see the next generation Polo GTI. I think it's going to be electric, but I would love to see it with a hybrid drivetrain sold at, as close as they could possibly get it to the £20,000 mark. I know that's probably a pipe dream, but I just think there are people out there, young people who've managed to maybe get their degree and land a decent job out of university, who are car enthusiasts, who are only looking on the used market, and it would be nice to at least offer them something on the new market, and get them into into enjoying cars, because I really don't want to see it as I get older in life that it becomes a disappearing enthusiast thing and people really start only talking about games and playing them online rather than actually owning a thing, because owning a car that you love is, for a car enthusiast, truly, truly satisfying. So, I hope you've enjoyed the podcast. If you have, as I say, subscribe to the channel. This is brand new channel on YouTube. It's now got its own channel for the podcast, so it does need as many subscribers and likes and hypes and everything else that it can possibly get, because otherwise, you know how it works on this sort of platform. It will just, no one will get to see it. I think that would be a shame. Obviously, go over to the main channel if you like this sort of stuff and you like me and you want to see more of me. I'm over on the Miles Driven, and so if you're listening to this, then thanks for being a listener. Do make sure you follow, and can't wait to catch you in the next one. Hope you all have a great day, and I shall catch you in the next one.